Okay, welcome everyone. And this is one of the forums we do. We do regular forums every month, and this one I think is particularly useful because of what it's talking about. We're combining this with our annual meeting. We have our annual meeting in January, and there we just look at the chairman's report, which I've already sent out, and we look at the treasurer's report, and then we see if there's anyone locally who would be interested in being on our core group. But before that, we're going to start with our topic, and it's a really relevant and interesting topic, and it's a topic about the new economy. Do we need a new economy? Is there something wrong with the economy we've got at the moment, especially at local level? And we're hoping Ben Kellard will be on the start. If not, we'll have to do things in reverse. He's not here yet, but he will talk about what the new economy is, what's wrong with the old one, and how we can create a system of local governance, hopefully to make it work. And then we're going to open it up for discussion with you. And then after that, we've got two people talking about how it can be done, how we can have place-based development and how important that is. And then particularly how a particular method of doing it called Doughnut Economics, which is how we behave and how we deal with our businesses and services within the constraints of our planet, how that can help us. And it's called Doughnut Economics. And we've got someone who is from Lincoln and from Locomotion there, who is going to, talk about that. And then we'll open it up discussion again. And then after that, we have our short annual meeting. Okay, is there any sign of Ben yet at all, Ben? It's complicated having two Bens.
Yes, no, there isn't. Not sure what's happened there. I think if I introduce it and then we can go with
Yeah, I think we'll have to do it in
Al.
reverse. If we could do
Yeah.
it with you, Al, and then with you, Debbie, and then Ben can come on afterwards and talk about the underlying, need for a new economy. Okay,
Yep,
Ben.
sounds
So
good.
if I hand over to you and you would like to introduce the two speakers and carry on from there, and that would be great.
Sure, that's fabulous. Okay, so I'm really excited today to introduce our speakers. So we've got Al Mothers, who's a PhD in participatory design and works with the Green Estate in Sheffield. Debbie Mace, who is a Webapper co-creator and also Doughnut Economics lead in Lincoln. And then we've got Ben Callard, who's a fellow at the Cambridge Institute of Sustainable Leadership. So I think the reason we've sort of briefly touched on it, but the reason that this is such an important conversation is that there's an assumption that whatever we believe now is just common sense, or what we always knew is just as is, and it forgets the power of the story and the storyteller and the power in the margins, which is everybody on this call who's here to move things forwards, and it also sort of forgets the potential for change in a coming EnCaf forum. We're going to dive further into the power of story and how they shape our realities. But this session will bring to life a vision that could stop you being sick and tired of being sick and tired, and healthier and happier. Um, and I think that I found a Starling quote actually. Ideas are far more dangerous than guns. We don't allow our enemies to have guns, so why should we allow them to have ideas? And we're hoping today's speakers will make you more dangerous in a caring way. So, Al, would you like to talk us
Yeah,
through what
sure.
your work, please,
Yeah.
first, the Q&A?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to join you all today. So yeah, as Ben mentioned, I'm based in Sheffield, and I suppose for my entire career, I've been very, very aware of how important personally place is for me. And I think that's kind of shaped how I think about the work that kind of happens to actually also forward what communities want from places, which is really kind of where my overall purpose and commitment lies. So a lot of the work that I do comes from a kind of deep participatory and regenerative perspective. So it's around the importance of revealing those kind of hidden stories, but working with people to go beyond just looking at what has shaped a place and what we see in front of us today, and some of those ever-present tensions between economy, society, and ecology, and really thinking about what could we think of those hopes and dreams for the future. So Ben referenced some work that I'm involved with currently with a brilliant organisation. They're a community interest company who are based in Sheffield, in Manor Castle. Sheffield's, like many cities, a place of huge contrast and division. And for many, many decades recently, Manor Castle in the north of Sheffield has been seen as an area that is not thriving, prospering. It's separated from a lot of the city physically by the railway and the roads that kind of cut off its residents. And over the course of the kind of past 3 decades, unemployment has continued to be a situation that many families have lived with for generations, that led upon with health conditions and challenges that have kind of come to kind of real visibility during the pandemic. And Green Estate are a really interesting organisation. They manage all of the green spaces on behalf of the Sheffield City Council in the area. And so they've always had this real kind of embedded approach. They are within the community, but they are seen in some ways as being also separate. So this kind of story of separation is really interesting, where you have a community interest company who could actually be telling a very different story and working with their community differently, but they also have a kind of separate relationship. They have done a huge amount of work around forwarding biodiversity. They created pictorial meadows, which some people may have heard about. They were a huge thing at the London Olympics, kind of the understanding that actually we could bring life back into our urban areas, and it would be joyful and colourful. But it's very interesting because, again, that story is a separate one from the residents who boundary Green Estate. So the work that I've been doing with Green Estate over the last year has been really focused on relationships, because I think that's at the heart of some of the challenges we have around place-based work. It's seen either as incomers parachuting ideas from outside and then not understanding what has actually played out for people who've lived there over time, or it's seen as hierarchical. So it may be that trust has been lost, and in a lot of ways in the area I work in, trust was lost with anchor institutions, with the city council, who residents felt had overlooked what was happening, and in fact actually exacerbated some of the negative stories around people in the area. So we've worked very closely to think about that long-term approach and process. So this isn't a project. This is a way of actually reinstating a focus on relational work, and thinking about actually starting where people are, rather than actually jumping to a future and something that can quite easily create more polarization and separation. What's really important has been the rich diversity of stories that people have actually woven together. So we have people in our group who are immigrants to the area, refugees and asylum seekers. We have people who've lived there for 40 years. We have younger people who have joined because there isn't work or opportunities to go into further education, and this is a skills building opportunity for them as well, and something that can actually have an immediate impact on their future. So I think it's been really important to have that starting point. What's the value for the individuals, and then what's the thing that emerges as a shared value and understanding through people's stories. We're about 9 months in now, so we've done a lot of work which has been really kind of looking back So what are those memories, those stories, and holding a lot of open spaces with open invitations and ways for different people to start actually building a connection, particularly with Green Estate as an organisation. On Tuesday, I was saying to Ben, we held our first winter community meal to tie in with the fact that actually in January there's very little going on for people in the area. And it was a terrible night. The weather was awful. And yet 25 people, we put up fairy lights because one of the things was people never felt welcomed. They didn't know where to go. So we literally lit the way. And this was, I think there was a moment when we thought, is anyone going to come through the door? And then suddenly this little 8-year-old boy ran in and just made himself completely at home. And I think for the Green Estate staff to see people who they'd never actually seen come across the threshold of the place that they work in was really powerful as well. There's something that's happening, and it seems small, but it enables us to know what that next opportunity is. And it's the fact that we were able to offer a pay-as-you-feel meal. It connected with a local church group who work with a food bank. We connected with an after-school club who we borrowed all the lighting from. And so we're actually not doing it at huge cost, but it takes a huge amount of care, and it takes a huge amount of thinking all the time, what is everyone going to need to make them feel that this is a welcome place and that they are welcome as part of this journey. So we don't have answers, but what it is starting to do is shift relationships. And it's starting to be something that we have the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority now. And at that kind of regional combined authority, they know again this story of separation plays out, but actually having ways that you can start to see in areas where people are very risk averse about actually, could it be something that would be overtaken by certain politics? Is it open to risk? But doing it with care and connecting with all these organisations means that there's actually a shared reason for people to be there and to care about it. And so I think that's what we're learning. Ben, I'm sorry I've not been keeping to time. I've just
You
been
have.
talking.
You've literally just stopped on the button. So no, thank you. That's brilliant. Because I think the first question I was going to ask, and of course, anyone else, if anyone's got any questions, please put your hand up or feel free to
Yeah,
put them in the chat.
we've got a couple more minutes for all, if you like, and then we go to Debbie, and then we can have a wide discussion. Yeah.
Oh yes, of course. Sorry, I forget that. That's great, Al. So we're going to go to Debbie, and then obviously I'll ask you some of those questions then.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant. Debbie?
Hi. Yeah, Ben, as much as I love Way I'm not a co-creator. I just had to say that.
Okay, sorry.
My name's Debbie Mace. I am Way Up a work practitioner for here. I'm the first one over here in Europe. It's an earth, mind, body, spirit wellness practice from Australia. And the reason that I mention it in connection with Doughnut is because the first time I saw Doughnut Economics, I was really overwhelmed by all the language and the arrows and the sections and the idea of being a 21st century economist. I don't understand the economy anyway. How am I going to understand this? It's too much. But it isn't, because actually it's called a donut because of the two circles. And Wayappa helped me to see this. So that first inner circle is all of our social systems. There's lots of labels, there's lots of language around it, but conceptually, that inner circle is all of our social systems. So that's everything from clean water, food, agriculture, transport, education, healthcare, manufacturing, business, everything. Everything that we as human beings plug into in our day-to-day lives is in that inner circle. Most of it is now red. There is only one section that is not red. It's not good. The outer circle is our climate. So again, there's a few sections there that aren't red because they updated it last October for Global Doughnut Days. So it's not looking good on when you actually dive deep into it, but just to understand the concept of it, which is where I'm at the moment, because it sounds like Al's a lot further ahead than we are in Lincoln. So I've just sent you a message on LinkedIn to connect so I can pick your brains. But when I explain that to people, and it only takes a few minutes, they light up. It's like, I get this. This is what we need. This makes sense. You know, Kate talks about the economy that we have at the moment as the plane that could never land because the consumption has to keep going to feed the beast. And we can't do that. We know we can't do that. It's going outside safe limits for the planet. It's keeping both of those circles, both of those cycles regenerative and flourishing, because when you have good stuff going on in one of the circles, it just naturally transfers to the other circle and then back and forth. So when you look at Doughnut from that perspective, which is, I know it's ultra simplified, but that's kind of where I'm working with it at the moment, and people do get it. And when you look at it from that perspective, it just brings so much potential. And that's where we kind of started with Doughnut. In 2023, we had a massive Doughnut event in Lincoln. It was run by the university. There were 85 people there, business, climate, education. There was, you know, across the board. And we had a really fantastic day. Rob Shorter from the Deal Economics Action Lab, the Deal team, came and actually ran the event for us. And he runs the grassroots group, which I would thoroughly recommend to anybody to join. It's an online monthly support, and it's absolutely brilliant. And he took us through this exercise of understanding the concept of the donut and then layering it up from there. And he got us doing lots of different exercises. All of this stuff's on the Deal website. There's so many tools and resources you can download for free off the Deal website. They're really incredible. And we came up with 4 clusters in 2023 in Lincoln to look at. One was access to nature, one was better business, one was marginalized voices, and one was community engagement. And then everything kind of fell off for a bit. It just went quiet. I've done a bit of digging, and what I've come up with is that, and this is sharing for learning's sake, really. We had 85 people at a really high profile event. But actually what happened after that was they went back to their teams, people moved jobs, people they might have had the enthusiasm and the passion, but they weren't in a position within the business or within that organization to push things forward. So things sort of went quiet for a while. And then last year in 2025, Climate Hope, which I'm also a founding member of, we went over to Birmingham to a place called Civic Square. And they're fantastic. They've got so much community engagement going on there. Don't know if anybody's heard of them, but if you ever get the chance to go visit, they do like schedule visits now. They get so many requests for visits. They actually like plan you in. But Bing, when I was talking to Bing and I said, you know, where did all this come from? Because there's just, you know, that you just, the buy-in from the community is just amazing. And this is central Birmingham. And she said, it would have been about 10 years ago when we started looking at the Doughnut Economics and we started getting it, doing portraits and making it meaningful for people. And we came back and we were really, really inspired. And then from there, I was part of, as I said, I've been part of that online grassroots group for about a year now. And they were talking about Global Doughnut Days in October, and there was funding available if people wanted to run events. And I just jumped in and I was just like, yeah, let's do it. And the response I've had has just been immense. I haven't had 85 people in a room, and I haven't looked to put 85 people in a room because that didn't really take off. So what we're doing now, a bit like what Al was talking about, we're doing the smaller stuff, the meaningful stuff, getting people together and having those conversations and asking them to envision what it is that this means to them and how that this can be taken forward. So with those 4 clusters, because that's what I focused on, so the access to nature cluster, that has actually now gone over to the Climate Commission. I'm also in the Climate Commission. So I'm helping I'm not leading on it, somebody else is, but I'm helping in that steering group. So we've got a project that we're looking at to look at maps, because we've got 4 maps in Lincoln, and that's just in Lincoln, not the whole county, but just in Lincoln. We've got 4 maps from 4 different organisations, and we're looking to kind of amalgamate them into one usable resource for people. And then from there, we've got a vision that we want to like build up so that we've got cycle routes and being able to walk between places. And, you know, hopefully we won't be under the sea in a few years' time, but we shall see. So, you know, we're getting people to buy into that, and they're making it meaningful for them. The marginalised voices, that's gone back to community groups and community hubs, and we're just going to see where that goes. And this week, actually yesterday and Tuesday, I had the online, because we had the in-person events in October, and then I had online meetups yesterday and Tuesday, and I had 4 or 5 people turn up to each, which isn't massive numbers, but I'd rather have the people there that have got the enthusiasm and the passion, and we'll build from there, rather than have lots of people and then it just drops off to nothing. So it's really, really worthwhile to just open up the question and be experimental, I think. I'm kind of losing track of my questions now, Ben. Is there anything that I haven't answered because I've been yabbering telling the story?
No, I think so. I think we'll ask them as well, sort of to just go over them afterwards as well. So that's absolutely fine.
I think, yeah, I think it's probably just best to see if there's any questions, because at the moment we're at that, as I said, we're not as far advanced as Al, but we are looking at having a hedgehog project and hedgehog highways. And we're looking at how I can link that into local business, because local business, the message that came through from the local business online meet yesterday was there's one person in particular who's so passionate about all this, and she's been pushing for 4 or 5, well, she said 5 or 6 years, she's been pushing to try and get Lincoln to come on board with Better Business. She said she travels nationally all over the country, meets different community groups and sows seeds in other places, but is finding it really, really hard to get anything going in our place. So we're having those conversations now around, well, rather than having a big event that fizzles off to nothing, why don't we do something that's more place-based, with community, with schools, building relationships, and let's look at hedgehogs, because that's part of our local nature recovery strategy, which has just come out this week. So it's trying to, like you were saying, Al, it's trying to link different things in together as much as you can and make it meaningful for people, and then offering it and saying, right, okay, what do you want to do? How do you want this to be? There is no kind of, it has to be this way. It really is about what makes sense for your place.
Thank you.
Shall we open it? Shall we open it up then to others to ask questions now? Before we do, I put some resources on the chat, which looks at what the Doughnut Economics is. It looks at what's happening in the Midlands. It looks at what's happening in Amsterdam. It looks at a toolkit that comes from DIL, which is the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. And it looks at how local government can get involved in the donuts, and that's quite good. And if you aren't too sure what the donut actually is, here's a picture of it, where the outer circle are the planetary constraints on us, and in the inner circle are our business, our social activities, and we're always looking at whether those activities are transgressing the planetary boundaries and what we can do to prevent it doing that. So basically that's a donut, which lots of local authorities, and there are about 50 across the world, using Doughnut Economics now as a tool to develop local governance, and that's really great. So Ben, shall we open it up to questions from people here now who might like to ask anything? Can I ask you, if you're going to ask a question, please put your camera on. And if you haven't got a camera on, can you put your questions in the chat? And can you put your hands up as well if you want to ask a question so we can see who's doing it? Ben Keller, by the way, has just come on. So let's have about 15 minutes of discussion, and then we'll go to Ben.
Sure.
Yeah, you've got your hand up, Sumi, but you don't have your camera on. So could you put your question in the text? Anyone else? Gosh, we
Yeah.
missed it. Yeah.
The camera was
Tom.
on, Francis, but it's a very dark background.
Oh,
You can
is it?
hardly see
Yeah.
it.
Okay. Sorry. It's a dark background. Okay. Ask your question then, Sumi.
All right then. Good evening, everyone.
Yeah.
Hello, good evening.
Hello. Go ahead.
My name is Asani Olumide from Nigeria. My question to Madam is that has she considered the three effects that drive environmental challenge? The scale, the composition, and the efficiency in terms of how she can apply the Thinsbank principle, which is the principle that holds that achieving multiple objectives with multiple policy instruments. Has she tried the Thinsbank's principle? That's my question to her.
That's a complicated question, but if I can translate it a bit, I mean, when we're dealing with, and in the Doughnut as well and elsewhere, we're dealing with complexity. How do you, when you're trying to deal with a community, deal with that complexity? Oh, do you want to have a go at that?
Yeah. So I think everyone realizes and sees it that the world is becoming ever more complex and connected, and it can be quite difficult to find a way into that. So with the group that we've been working with, the route in has been to very much say there are a number of stories that play out in this place, and they will have dimensions which are more visible and less visible, some of which will maybe be about your social interactions, some of which may be the underlying economic factors that have shaped this place, and some of which are what you see and sense and experience in terms of the ecology and the environment. And so with the group, it was very open, and similar to what Debbie said, we weren't prescriptive, but what we have looked at, and we've gone through a kind of co-analysis process together, is to actually start to see how prominent are these stories, and why are they kind of more prominent for certain people than others. And what we see is that in the area that we're working in Manor Castle Ward, the social stories are the things that people most care about. So their relationships with their neighbours, their families, their friends, whether they feel that places are safe, whether they feel that there is hope for their children for the future. So these kind of stories are the really prominent stories, but they are obviously heavily underpinned by the economic conditions. And so actually they've been a route into looking at some of those economic structures and systems that have either supported people or not. What has been really interesting is for people, particularly in the area we're working in, they have an understanding that climate change is happening and real, and we've had floods in Sheffield on a increasingly regular basis and extreme weather, but they're not the things that people most talk about or see. And the fact that whilst there is huge amounts of green space in Sheffield, and Sheffield has more trees, I think, than most cities across Europe at this point, they're not the things that people really focus on, because they're very, very much in the moment about what is affecting their day-to-day life. So we've kind of had to work from the social stories through the ecological structures and systems, and start to see what are the different roles that people can play. So it opens up the opportunity for nature connection. And when we're looking at nature connection, we have to almost find acupuncture points and nodes to activate it. So we've done things that have really been kind of wake ups about what that experience and connection is with nature is, because it's very far away from kind of what people will talk about on a daily basis with you.
Okay, let's try and get some other people in as well. Anybody else want to ask a question? I mean, that point of complexity, Debbie, do you want to respond to that? Because the Doughnut looks complex when you see it. You say it's very simple, but people get pretty, phased out when they see this Doughnut and all the things you have to keep to stop you going across into the planetary boundaries. How do you turn complexity into a simple idea that people can relate to?
We use the stepping into the donut, or I use the stepping into the donut activity from the deal team. And it's a very simple activity, and it only takes a few minutes, but you get whoever's in the room, you get them up on their feet, and I have scarves and ribbons so that people can hold on to the scarves and ribbons. And we just make that center circle with people making up that central circle, and then another circle on the outside, so that people, when you're talking about the social and the climate system, they're actually experiencing what that would look like and what that would feel like, and making it meaningful for them. That's been the key. And we're also looking at it from the point of view, because I know it's not going to hit, this isn't going to spark everybody. But what we're looking at, the phrase we're using is sowing purposeful seeds. So we're sowing purposeful seeds that we know some of them will land on that fertile soil and they will be nourished and they will flourish. And others may take a little bit longer to germinate, and some may not at all. But we know we haven't got all the answers, is what I'm saying. There isn't one answer that's going to hit everything. And I'm not saying that the donut is, but as Al explained with the process, that they're that bit further ahead than us. It's going back, and it is people's stories. It has to be meaningful. It has to be meaningful for the person and for their family and their community, because when it is, and they can make sense of that, and then it inspires hope, and you can build on that. That's when the magic happens.
Okay. Anyone else want to come in? Paul, because Paul is from Locomotion, and he's Locomotion has taken a particular interest in Doughnut Economics, which is why we've got Lincoln, and I think we've got some people from Carmarthen on the call today, because they're looking at the Doughnut and their Locomotion as well. Paul is Locomotion in Enfield, so Paul, over to you. But you'll have to unmute.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and thank you, Al. Debbie, I was wondering, have you yet done, just thinking about Hope Local, have you created a donut specifically for Lincoln or for any part of Lincoln, so that to make it closer for the community?
We've got two neighbourhood groups which I haven't mentioned, and similar to Al, they're in the more deprived centres of more deprived areas of Lincoln, because Lincoln has actually in that top 10% of in the city. When you look at Lincolnshire as a county, then it changes. But when you actually look at Lincoln as a city, it's got quite a lot of deprivation. So we've got two in-person on this, or in that area. One is at the Tower Hill estate, and the other one's at the Ermine. And we've got a couple of research workers who are actively going to start doing a donut profile and building up their stories and starting to look at what's meaningful in those particular areas. And then the idea is that once we've focused on those, we can then replicate that process. But this is about learning as well. This is a learning and growing journey, and it's experimental, and it's as I keep saying, it's meaningful for people, because that's the key. So the clusters came out of the 2023 big event with 85 people. So that was my take up. That's what I kind of started from last year when we were doing the Global Doughnut Days. The focus now is on business and access to nature. And then, as I said, marginalised voices will go back to community hubs and groups, and it's all about community engagement. That's across the board. We're trying to get as many people. So we're still working on that. But we'll keep in touch.
Okay. I mean, we got Ben Kellard on now, and we're going to have open it up to discussion after Ben. Ben beat two Bens. Ben, do you think we should go to the other Ben now and talk about the new economy, and then open it up to discussion again? Because I think it would be good to do it that way.
Yeah, and also apologies, Ben was late because there was a problem updating the schedule. So that's yeah, it was showing us 7:30 for him. So I just wanted to say that to the group. So Ben, nice to see you.
Great to join you all. Thanks very much for having me. Great, always great to see you, Ben, as well.
Likewise. Are you happy to share your screen and take us through those few slides that you've got?
Sure thing. Yeah, thanks very much. And hopefully what I can share is maybe offering a bit of a kind of going back to sort of first principles. It sounds like you've had a really rich conversation insight there. Just to briefly introduce myself, so I'm a fellow at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, which is part of the university, and the King is our patron. And so my background sort of helping advising and educating senior leaders on how to become more sustainable, mostly in the private sector. But in the last year or so, I've been working in my own time in an independent project to look at what is a shared narrative for a new economy. And that's how Ben and my paths crossed. Ben's generously collaborated as part of that project. And I want to just sort of share what we've been up to and why. So if you just bear with me a second, let me share my screen. Hopefully, yeah, Ben, can you let me just quickly go into presentation mode because I know sometimes that throws it. So hopefully
You're
that
showing the wrong way. So
is
it's
it.
showing, well, actually, no, I don't know. Yes, it's fine. It's good.
Is that now full screen mode?
Yep.
Brilliant. So as a social, purpose-led storytelling species, the stories we tell about ourselves are really important. Of course, it shapes our meaning, shapes how what is legitimate, what isn't legitimate, how we behave, and what we aspire to. And so, first of all, why would we need a narrative for a new economy? Well, basically, to sort of summarize, we know we need urgent transformation. You know, we're midway through the decisive decade. That's what all the scientists are telling us. And we need to or reorientate things rapidly. We know the current economy isn't working. There's widespread inequality. It's accelerating the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, and things getting worse, not better. And we know the key systems we have to transform: food, energy, mobility, and so on. And we also know that we can't just leave this to business or governments or finance. They all need to work together, including civil society. And we also know that the old narratives, that it's all about the market, individual freedom, and consumers, is very well funded and very well organized and dominates. And we don't have a clear, credible alternative. People often think, well, you must mean communism, that didn't work right. And we often lack, because a lot of the work I work with businesses, and you might find this in your sector as well, is that often you can get to the point where, okay, we need to transform, but you might get a business leader realizing, okay, we need to become sustainable, but oh, well, that won't work because, because of policy, I will get penalized and my competitors won't, or the banks will come down on me like a ton of bricks, my shareholders, and so on. So often we lack the kind of idea of, well, what are the roles of different actors in that economy to bring it alive? And so often a lot of the debate focuses on the downstream effects of the economy, growing inequality, cost of living crisis, pollution, and so on. We know all about that. That's what hits the media. But very rarely do we trace that upstream to say, well, like a river, where is its causes? Where is it coming from? What are the tributaries? What are those stories and beliefs we tell ourselves about the economy that shapes the structures and policies, cultures and incentives and behaviors that lead to those downstream outcomes? And that's what I want to kind of share with you, connect the dots on some of that stuff. And so often I think, there's loads of stuff happening on the new economy. We've heard some of it already this evening: sustainable business, sustainable finance, post GDP metrics. But it's like there's loads of bits of the jigsaw puzzle, but it's like we don't have the picture on the top of the box. Like, what's all this laddering up to? What's the meaning behind it? So I want to share with you a version of that narrative, which is starting with, well, what is the good life? What is well-being? Because we're often, I think, led to believe that, well, there's 8 billion of us, and if you asked us, we get 8 billion different answers. Well, the evidence would suggest otherwise. The evidence suggests that actually, based on both consultation and research, there's very consistent views across cultures and across time on what makes up well-being. And it may not come as a surprise. It's things like feeling secure and part of healthy communities, having meaningful, fairly paid work that we can feel proud of the work we do. We have time for loved ones and the art of life. We have access to clean air, affordable food, and so on. And that we can feel optimistic about the future and like life is getting better for our generations and so on. But the reality is this feels like a long way, not even just for us in the high income countries, but also low income countries. This feels like a fantasy. It's far away from most people, which is one of the reasons why the current economy isn't working. So why is that? Well, kind of very simply put, there's a root cause, I'd say, is if we have these self-reinforcing cycle, which is the assumption that money is a proxy for well-being. That is the assumption. And that then means that businesses are incentivized to maximize profits because profits equals finance. But what that means is that then businesses are incentivized to minimize the labor they use because they want to use as few people as much as they can, which means people work long hours and so on. It means they want to create insatiable demand because the more people buy, the more turnover, the more profits, which creates demand whether you want it or not. In fact, often the massive global advertising industry is often about undermining needs in order to create demand. And it means putting costs onto nature and society, like pollution and so on. Because if you don't and your competitors are doing that and you're not, you will go out of business very quickly. Because if you're paying for the carbon or the plastic you're putting into the market, then you'll quickly go out of business, which then drives the polycrisis. It drives inequality, it drives scarcity, it creates enormous amounts of pollution and so on, and creates overconsumption, driving that multiple crisis. And notice that is in sharp contrast to the well-being described here. So there's a structural misalignment between what the economy is designed to do and actual well-being. It also leads to a fragile economy that I don't have time to go into. But also on the side of the public sector, the public sector therefore is often influenced by elites who are often you have this centralization economy leads to centralization of power, which often puts pressure on governments, also through media and things like that, to grow the economy. Because the assumption is if we grow the economy, that leads to well-being, even though there's very little evidence that is the case. In fact, the opposite is often the case, which means they want to kind of grow the economy, but also reduce taxes, which means that they also, because of the polycrisis, they're having to create more public services to pay for the negative effects of that economic model, whether that's loneliness, whether that's diabetes, whether that's often called defensive expenditure, clearing up after waste and so on. So there's more demand on public services, but less money to pay for them that leads to indebted governments. Sound familiar? So that's the kind of reinforcing cycles in the economy that we have today. And so it's maybe time to question, is it time that some of our fundamental assumptions about the way the world works, but without throwing the baby out with the bathwater? How do we keep hold of the stuff that works well and just change the stuff that doesn't? And no, I don't mean communism. There is another way. There are many forms of capitalism. We've just picked the wrong one. So what might an alternative look like? Well, so last year I convened over 30 leaders in both the economy and across the range of different schools of new economy, including things like Doughnut Economics, that represents all those different views. And we came together and said, what are the shared principles? We also brought in leaders from the economy. So we had asset managers there, we had executive team members of multinationals, and we had government chief economists of the Scottish government, for example. And this is what we kind of came up. We started with describing, well, what would be the downstream effects you'd experience in a new economy? Well, you'd have more time for loved ones. There'd be less pressure, shorter working weeks, but with more meaningful employment because deployment would be aligned to what people actually want. There'd be less consumption, but higher quality products and services that last for longer. There'd be greater innovation and investment in innovation, plus public services to deliver on well-being goals. And there'd be strong local engagement of local communities to shape the goals of what the economy is there to do. And there'd be access to affordable, clean energy, food, and housing. Ben, you might be asking me, what have you been smoking? That sounds, what kind of fantasy world are you living in? Well, stay with me. What could actually design that? Well, if we go upstream, what are some of the fundamental assumptions? The assumption is that people are part of nature and dependent on it and each other to thrive and to live a fulfilling life. Well-being, therefore, lies in flourishing relationships. Everything's connected between people and the natural world. And that society is a complex embedded system within the natural world, not separate from it. And so therefore, in short, the sum purpose of the economy would serve long-term well-being for people and planet, not the other way around, arguably as it is today. And notice the symbol of the infinity loop of being a symbol of this. And so broadly then, as I come to close, the roles of actors would be different to how it is today. First of all, you'd have a strong partnership between civil society and the state, where the state engages local communities to say, what is well-being? What does it mean to us? In Enfield, what is important to us? Is it access to green spaces? Is it health, education? What are the core priorities for us as a community? And then what the state would do, unlike today, is it would then start to shape and incentivize markets in order to deliver those well-being outcomes, unlike how it is today, where it's all put into the market, right? So yes, and so they'd also set parameters that would be agreed, and those parameters are essentially how those goals would be operated within. So things like net zero or what would be the level of inequality tolerated, and so on. These would be parameters. And so then structures and incentivize markets to deliver them. And so businesses would then be incentivized to produce goods and services that are delivering on those well-being goals as incentivized by the state. So notice there's still markets, there's still allowing the private sector to do what it does best, which is innovate and so on, that would then provide meaningful work because it's actually delivering real well-being outcomes, not undermining, and it would be fairly paid. And then finally, finance would be funding that real economy work, unlike what it does today, where the majority of finance is financing finance, not the real economy, which is putting greater volatility into the economy. So that's how it'd be different, underpinned by the commons and households. So whereas today the market provides most of our goods and services, in a well-being economy, that provision would be much more balanced between the state, the market, households, and the commons. And so then finally, you then have rather than a vicious, you'd have a virtuous circle where the state sets well-being goals and parameters in close relationship with civil society. That would then incentivize businesses to be purpose-led, which in turn would deliver meaningful, fairly paid work and deliver well-being goods and services within environmental limits, so they wouldn't be creating all the pollution, which would then both lead to well-being outcomes and wouldn't require that defensive expenditure to clear up the mess afterwards. It'd also be more stronger because it'd be more devolved and resilient as an economy. And that would free the state up to actually invest in positive investments into public services towards those well-being goals. It would actually help to crowd in and scale up the private sector investments. You'd have this positive loop between public and private investment aimed at shared well-being goals. So hopefully that's and then just to summarize then the key shifts then and what we're describing as the plentiful life under a well-being economy is a shift from the extractive economy to a plentiful well-being economy, moving from isolation to connection, scarcity to abundance, and from insecurity to security. So that's kind of the big picture, and it'd be great to hear your reflections and maybe explore what this might mean for a borough like Enfield.
Thanks ever so much, Ben. Does anyone have any questions? I've got a few, but I want to put it out to the floor.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
You can. Look, I found myself in a monitor one. It's a very common experience for me for many, many decades. About 30 or 40 years ago, I realized that the system I was living under, I came from the UK, was basically a lie. Politicians lied, teachers lied, adults lied. So I've spent a lot of time, you might say, long-term meditation and observation of the human condition. I have no idea what that man was saying, Ben. I have no idea. What I will say is this, and I'll make two proclamations. The only successful society is one which is based on the vast majority of the inhabitants acknowledging and adhering to a lethally accurate, finely tuned moral compass. The thing that's destroying you people and society and humanity is your morality. It's not immoral anymore, it's amoral. They don't know the difference. They can't distinguish. And if a society is not based on the fact that you look after the widow, the orphan, the hungry and the poor first, not as a last, it's not a trickle down. If you're not focused on looking after people and connecting with people, you'll never be successful. And by the way, I have books to suggest. If anybody's read Eric Fromm, Sane Society, Art of Loving, these are books you need to read and digest. And also, by the way, probably the two greatest books I'm reading at the moment, one is called, I read it many years ago, The Road Less Traveled. And the next one is The Road Less Traveled and Beyond. But these are by M. Scott Peck. If you want to learn psychology in the simplest and most digestible form, read these books like your life depends on it.
Okay,
Thanks, David. I
Okay.
completely sorry, Francis. I completely agree, and we do need some moral ambition. I have put a link to Katie Shields' video, How and Why Economists upheld neoliberalism. It's a 6-minute video on how neoliberalism has been weaved into institutions since the 1950s, which has obviously created the narrative to your point. So completely agree. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and
Hold
also
on,
just
David, because we've got
yeah.
other people that want to come in, and you've made your
Well,
point. Okay.
excuse me. I
Let-
didn't. I'm spoken for long.
no,
I mean,
okay.
a lot of people spoke much longer than I have, but these are important points.
Okay, but I want to get other people in as well. Okay,
But
and
nobody
so
came
let's do it.
forward. Nobody came forward.
Okay, well, hold on, and you haven't got
Sonny
your.
has his hand up.
Yeah, your sonny's got his hand up. You haven't put your
Okay.
hand up, David,
I
either.
don't know
You
how to do
really,
this. I've
well,
tried.
and you need to put your camera on. Okay,
I tried
Sonny.
that as well. I tried that as well. I can't get it on.
Sonny, would you like to come in?
Okay.
All right, then my question to Ben is that it's been emphasized on increased GDP. I think the challenge is how do we decouple economic growth from waste generation? Then how do we transition from extravatism and unsustainable pattern of consumption towards a regenerative social ecological system based on reciprocity and care? How do we transition from extravatism and unsustainable consumption in order to align with the SDG 12, which is about sustainable consumption and production? So that's my question to Ben. The transitioning from extravatism and unsustainable pattern of consumption. That's my question to Ben.
Yeah. Okay, Ben. How do we do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that I think that there's lots of policy instruments. So what we're not short of is policy instruments. And I can signpost you to a number of them. I think that there are a number of them. For example, but what I think it needs to start with is that link between civil society and governments, because it feels like that's the legitimate role here in terms of, because then you have the legitimacy to pull those policy levers to, and I think that's what, because I think that I spent a lot of time working with what we call corporate voluntarism, trying to get corporates to behave well. And it just doesn't work because all the incentives are moving against them to behave well. And so that's why I think it has to. So there are lots of things like, for example, taxing bads rather than goods. So, you tax pollution more rather than things like VAT and income tax. There's things like taxing the use of common goods, whether that's environmental resources, data, and so on. So there's lots of tools like that, plugging tax havens. So I think, and there's great in Earth for All book, they've got a whole list there. There's also a lady called Sarah Al-Mahdi who's published a whole load of degrowth policy instruments. So I think what it really needs to, it is about power, I think. It is about taking power back into the public domain because so much of it has moved into the market and is therefore dominated by elites in markets and there's a huge democratic deficit. And just picking up on what David said, I think it's a really good point linking into that, is that this is part of the issue, I think, in the West, is that we've essentially, what we've done is we've said the state has nothing to say about what the good life is. That is down to individuals. So what we've done is both politically, economically, we've put that to individuals, but then we've mediated through a market as if markets are neutral. They're not neutral. They're massively asymmetrical. And so that's what's led to this kind of amoral society. So partly a big part of what a wellbeing economy is doing is having that dialogue of what is the good life, both what do we need to shed collectively and how do we deliver that? And then that's informing how we privately, individually choose to lead the good life. So there is a really important element to that, which I want to pick up on what David said as well, because it is one of the really, I think, political, philosophical holes in the current situation. But I see we have a few other hands up, which I'd love to.
Okay, yeah, Kathy, do you want to make your
Oh,
point?
yes, just quickly, I would really love to see a relationship between government and civil society and communities. But the media gets in the way. The media controls the story at the moment to a really outrageous extent. And they don't talk about what the actual government is doing. We don't hear what the Labour government is doing, the good stuff. We don't get the government story because all the time they're picking on Westminster gossip or they've got the billionaires controlling the media. So what can we do?
It's a really good question. And of course, the media has been captured by corporates like any other sector. So you're probably aware it's an oligopoly like most, and they have a clear agenda, which is often driven through the media. So you're absolutely right. And I think that one of the principles is that try to deal with issues at the level at which they're created. So things like, for example, carbon emissions does need to be operated at a global level because there is a global kind of issue. But there are a lot of things that happen at the local level. There's a lot of things that happen at a micro level. And so I think that what we need to do is, I think, have debates that tackle things that operate at the level at which they're created. Because a lot of people once, someone said that the problem with the national state is that they're too big to worry about people's individual concerns and not big enough to deal with the big global wicked problems we're facing, right? So they kind of fall between stools. So that's why I think actually cities, boroughs are really interesting levels where they can really engage with concerns that local people have. It's granular enough to say what's important to us. And I had a really inspiring talk by the mayor of West Yorkshire, who was talking about how mayors are playing a really critical catalytic role, linking up concerns of local citizens, with supply chains. So for example, in bringing investment into like creating housing, but then making sure the supply, the colleges are there to train people to deliver low carbon housing. So that's a very practical way of aligning supply chains around local concerns. So I think you're right, Kathy, media, that can be a real problem, but I think how might we use social media and other platforms? But I think it's really that having that debate around saying what's important to us and what are the policy instruments and ways and things within our disposal we can use to align public and private investment towards those goals.
Okay, Debbie, you want to come in on that as well?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was just to add into that that conversation you're having about sort of like the moral side of things and how we take things forward. And something that I've picked up within the training I've done with First Nation people, I've learned so much, and that's generational wellness. And that's the idea that we consider the actions that we're taking today for at least 7 generations. And that's something that we don't have in our system at the moment, but it would, if we did, if it was central to that wonderful presentation you just given, Ben, if that was part of that core concept. I mean, imagine if that had stayed within the Industrial Revolution, if we'd gone forward but at a pace that actually stayed at pace with nature, that considered what we were doing for the future, we wouldn't be in this mess now, because 7 generations, that's 100 to 150 years time. We don't have that kind of long-term thinking. That's just something I want
Absolutely,
to
absolutely great point, Debbie. And it's one that I think I draw your attention to everyone, and I'm sure you're aware of this, Debbie, but it's the Wales have created the sort of Future Generations Act, which has embedded that into decision making, and they're really leading. Scotland and Wales are some of the most leading countries in the world in terms of progressing. And I think you're absolutely right. And one of the interesting things about indigenous economics, which you say often refers to sort of First Nation countries, is that they never went through the sort of dualism split that we went through in the West, where we separated man from nature. To them, they've always had a relationship. They've always recognized that interdependence between, people and nature. So they're like, yeah, of course we treat it as sacred and so on. And that's why I think I agree with you. We can learn so much from them. And that's why there's a whole school of indigenous economics, as I'm sure you're aware of. But what we've tried to do is find the common ground in all of that, because they're so consistent with feminist economics, ecological economics, Doughnut economics. They're incredibly consistent with what they're saying, which is coming back. And that's what we've tried to capture in this work, is what are those fundamental underpinning principles that recognizing that it's fundamentally about relationships and reciprocity. And recognizing that and building on what David said, I'm deep in the literature at the moment about what is really delivering well-being, and people write like Fromm and so on. And really what it's coming down to is that connection, connection with self, dare I say it, with, spiritually, and with nature and with others, and it's that real connection as people, and that is what is really leading to real sense of human flourishing. And so I think what we're saying is then, okay, well, what would it look like to an economy that actually delivered that, rather than just trying to create growth for growth's sake, when actually lost that growth is actually undermining well-being. I mean, look at the food industry, without even having to look as far as the oil and gas industry and so on. And I think that would be that's the orientation we need. If not, frankly, we're into escalating crises within the next 5 to 10 years. So yeah.
Anyone else who would like to come in?
Oh, I see, Bob, have you got your hand up there?
Bob, have you?
Yes.
You've got your
Hello.
hand up physically. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. One thing I thought is quite interesting is to note that there doesn't seem to be a lot of competence really in our political class. And there was a video that I was watching recently with TED.com called The Voice of the Workers. And it dealt with how China dealt with encouraging people up the chain of command effectively, within the Communist Party. I'm not advocating communism, but one thing I did take away from it is that within their system, they have a sort of national HR, and you don't get up the chain unless you're competent. And we seem to have a system which is like the Americans, can put someone in power who's completely not fit for the job. And that is
Bob,
something that we maybe need to look at.
Bob, do you want to briefly deal with that? I mean, if you have a corporate society like we have, many people believe you get promoted to your level of incompetence. How do we overcome that?
Can I share a point there, which is quite interesting, which is that classic Einstein quote, which we've all heard, which is, we cannot solve a problem with the same thinking that we use to create it. And you've got a challenge where the philosophy, politics and economics PPE degree, it's taught at Oxford. Most of the prime ministers have been there. Rachel Reeves has been there. News reporters, the economics news reporters have studied it. Everyone has got that frame, and all it teaches is neoliberalist economics, which at its core only has one rational individual, which isn't how the world operates. And I think that it's, I mean, getting, and there is a challenge because we know that corporations fund education establishments, but actually getting the education establishments to start teaching other versions of economics. Yes, of course, maybe talk about neoliberalism, but these other ways, and start to get them ingrained. That is a long game, of course. The other thing is actually finding, there are many, many tools to get people to connect with nature and feel what's actually in their hearts and find moral ambition. The challenge is getting busy people to let that happen. Ben Kellard, do you have any builds at all?
Yeah, I think the education is interesting. I went to an event this week with Kate Rayworth, founder of Doughnut Economics. There's a really interesting lady there who's lobbying. A number of big countries are reviewing the whole of their syllabus, and so there's this window of opportunity to get diversity economics onto the syllabus, which she's working on, which I think is super inspiring. When actually, because the evidence base for classical economics is really thin and dreadful, whereas the evidence based alternative is huge now. It's absolutely, so it's a travesty that that our business schools and schools are churning out the same old rubbish. So I quite agree. I also think Plato had it right, where he said the problem is good leaders don't want to lead. That was one of the fundamental things he looked at in the Republic. But also, in the literature, what it does talk about is the need to invest in competence in government. So, because of the neoliberal model, we've assumed the market is more efficient. Basically, governments have been thinned down, and all investment goes into the private sector at great cost. There's costs that gone up by 40% as a result. Anyway, that's another story. But a lot of the work by people like Mazzucato and others say you need to bring in some more capacity into government to be able to structure the right policies, structure the right partnerships, crowding the investment and so on. So I think, Bob makes a really good point. It links back to the time horizons where if you're a Chinese politician, you're going to be a politician for decades. So you are investing when you're at the peak of your career. So I think that's where we do need, sort of well-being goals and legislative outcomes that do bridge, governments and go beyond the 4-year cycle. So things like the Multi-Generation Act perhaps are legal frameworks that might help to change the time horizons of our politicians, perhaps.
It's Laura, you have your hand up.
Hi, yes. Thanks, Ben, for your presentation. It was really interesting. I think you touched on it already when you were talking about the capacity, right, of local government. And I was just thinking, when you mentioned, that civil society and local government need to work together, how do you deal with the current situation that a lot of charities find themselves in? It's very difficult funding sector at the moment. A lot of charities are firefighting. You need a team, you need resources, you need money to be able to engage in any kind of like policy influencing work. And also from the local government side, if we're thinking about London and specific boroughs that are really, the local councils are really struggling, they're understaffed. Some councils have gone bankrupt. how do we address those underlying systemic issues? And I guess we talk a lot about collaboration in the sector. I went to an event yesterday where they said that collaboration is spoken about more than it actually happens. Well, if I'm talking about the charity sector and the funding sector specifically, and I guess my question is a lot of questions in one, sorry. Also, do we have good examples of this being done well? In the UK would be great, but if there are other countries as well that you can, pull examples from, I would love to hear.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, no, great questions. And I mean, look, let's be quite honest. As we know, most of our sectors are in crisis at the moment, because it's so acute. That sort of cycle I showed it's not at the early stages. It's really developed very acute. And I think you're right in what you described. I think what this is showing in the new economy is a new way of working, because what it does, it's not in the old, because the trouble is, otherwise we go back to really outdated views, which is, let's ask the government for more money to do good work. That's not going to solve things because they're broke. And even if they did, that's not going to change the fact that it's where is most of our productive capacity pointed towards? That is what matters. And so the risk is that we end up, it's side of play. It's the up to 5% on the side of the core productive capacity of our economy. Otherwise, we're going to have, cash strapped, whether it's public sector or third sector, trying to clear up the mess of the main productive capacity of our economy, which is creating these externalities and not delivering well-being. So it has to deal with that upstream. Otherwise, frankly, I think we're just going to burn ourselves out, as our doctors, nurses, and charity people are already, right? So I think we do need to think differently, and therefore we do also need to be realistic about where are those points of influence. So I think it comes back to, like, what entity we're looking at. Is it a borough? Is it the GLA? Is it kind of the nation and so on? But that's why I think we need to have a framework like this, which says there is a clear evidence-based, credible alternative for way in which we can operate here. And it's something that, so it's not really kind of a direct answer to your question, but I think that's where it has to start. I really do, to create those incentives, because once you start to do that, everything starts to change. Businesses start to change what they innovate. They start to pay for partnerships. They start to create opportunities. And I've seen it. I've seen, the funding starts to unravel, everything flows from there. Otherwise, you're just like a salmon trying to swim upriver. To answer your question about examples, there are. I've put in I think Ben's going to share both Doughnut Economics and also a great organization called the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, which is a global organization that brings together thinking in this area. They've all got loads of case studies, and I've put link into those for inspiration. But I think on our own turf, I mean, looking at what Scotland's doing, Wales is doing, we've got lots of other examples of, I think we've got some on the line already where things are happening. We've got in Oxfordshire, we've got in the West Midlands Combined Authority, Shropshire, Hills National Landscape. We've got in Somerset, we've got Bath and North Eastern, Frome, and so on. There's many councils and boroughs doing really great work. But the reality is it is still the minority, but things can tip very quickly. That's what we know about systems. They don't always happen in a linear way. I think it's about, we know from experience, it's when you create a sort of majority between 5 and 15% in a system, it starts to create a tipping point in that social system. So I think that's one of the reasons why I want to do this work, is to create accessible narratives that anyone can use for different purposes depending on their context. And what I've shared isn't the narrative, it's the fundamental underpinning of the narrative, which will come later, which hopefully you can use it as assets to use to influence stakeholders in your sector and region.
Okay, I mean, we'll have to come to our annual meeting bit in a minute, but we've got Angela and we've got David. David goes first and then Angela. If we take both of you together, so David first.
Okay, thanks for the talks, everyone. Brilliant. My question leads off something that Ben said. If we have corporate capture of the levers of power, and we've talked about government, media, economics, education, how is this best addressed?
Angela?
Yeah.
Angela?
Yeah, and my question, I guess, is sort of linked to what David's saying, and it's, what are the mechanisms that those local authorities have adopted to make it possible to start to operate in a more well-being focused way? Yeah.
Let's take, before we come to you, Ben, let's take it. Let's make this the last 2 points. If we come to you, Ben, and then ask the other two speakers to respond to that as well. How do we do that at a local level? How do we get the collaboration? How do we get things to happen in a more well-being way. So let's start with you, Ben.
Yeah, and I think the other speakers will be better placed at the specific level, but some of the case studies can pick up on that. I think it's a really good question about corporate capture. The reality is states have a lot of legitimate tools they can use to address corporate capture, but at the moment I don't think there's the pressure, there's not the clarity, and there's not the accountability to do that. And it is a power issue, in the similar way as someone Grace Blakely has pointed out. It's like wrestling power, like Thatcher did, right or wrongly, and I think probably wrongly, took power from the unions and put it into the markets. There's almost that similar power shift we need to make. But what the evidence, if you're not familiar with John Alexander's work around citizenship, it's really powerful around when you do engage citizens, they get really creative, they get really great sense of ownership. That's our model, and to close the massive democratic deficit that's occurred over the last few decades. So yeah, I think it's not going to be easy, David, but I think in the democratic institutions to exert that, and I think the reality is a lot of us aren't exerting that in reality, obviously in lots of ways, not just through elections. But I'll keep that brief. Francis, back to you.
Okay, and Debbie, do you want to come on and respond to that at all?
I think I will, but I'll keep it really brief because I think Ali's probably in a better position because she's a bit further down the line to answer this. For us, it's about keeping it meaningful, and it's those purposeful seeds, and it's also not being too precious about the outcome, because that's going to come from people. It's not going to be your agenda, it's going to be their agenda. So it has to come from the community, whatever that group is. One of the really good examples they gave at Civic Square when we were there was a childcare group that the mums had just gone and organised themselves. They didn't have any funding for it. They did it purely as right, I'll have them all this week, you have them next week. And they did that, and it grew and grew, so that the more mums that were involved, they were just, they took charge for 1 week session, and then the other weeks they got to go and take some time off and do what they wanted. So there's different ways of doing things, but it has to be meaningful. And now I'll hand over to Ali because I think she's in Al's.
Okay, Ali, are you there?
Yeah. So I suppose I would just say the biggest challenge I think that we've seen is that funding, particularly for charity organisations, goes to solving a problem rather than supporting that organisation to flourish in the place with the purpose that it has. So I think there has to be a shift in the funding landscape to not want us to fix problems anymore, but actually how do we create a kind of connected approach that can sustain and can adapt and can evolve. And so that requires some quite challenging conversations. We had to have it with the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, just as Debbie was saying. We can't tell you what the outcomes are going to be, but what you're investing in is an infrastructure that's going to be stronger at the end that wasn't there before. So yeah, I think that's where a lot of the work should happen.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I mean, that was great to having that, because you got held up, Ben. We had to do it in reverse, and it worked in reverse. And it shows you that transformation in reverse is going to work sometimes. So it went really, really well. So thank you, everyone. And I've recorded this, so this recording of this meeting will go out to everyone, and I will record the individual presentations and turn them into smaller videos as well. But we now come to the bit which is our annual meeting, which needs not be very long, because what we do here is just go through very briefly what we've done over the year, Treasurer's report, very brief, and then we'll ask anyone here if they would like to join our core meeting if they live in our local area. So let's start by looking at what we've done in the past as part of a report. I sent it out actually as a newsletter, and it's here if you can see it now. And I'll just go through the things we've been doing, which I think have been quite a lot. One of the things, of course, we've been active on, which is what we're doing here today, is our online forums. Our online forums are really well attended. We had over 70 registrations today. And we try to deal with topics which are educational, which are engaging, and which give people ideas on how to take activities forward. So that's one of the things we've been doing, and we've been doing consistently. We've been doing work on heat access. We've been running community hubs or workshops on heat excess to look how it affects the most vulnerable. We've worked with Ruth Winston House Age UK because it's usually older people living alone who are most affected and most vulnerable. So we've done work on that. We've been working with Power Up North London and with schools to see whether they will develop a community energy project like having solar panels on their roofing. And we now have 4 schools doing that, and we're hoping to extend that. And they are a part of a partnership that we've developed to work with schools to develop climate action plans. We've been working particularly with University College London and that partnership with Power Up North London and others to help schools to develop climate action plans. And we have got 6 or 7 schools in the pilot that we're doing now. And we're hoping to expand it next year. And that is turning out to be really, really successful because it means getting volunteer ambassadors that will go into the schools and help the lead person in that school on sustainability. And we found those volunteers through our network. And in addressing schools, we've actually been asked by other schools to provide speakers. So we're trying now to develop a speakers panel that will go into schools when schools want them to actually address the students there on climate change. We're also working, this is Vulnerability Index, for the University of Birmingham to develop 2 World Cafe projects in different wards in the borough to see how they differently respond to extreme weather that is going to happen and how we can set up a vulnerability index to find the most vulnerable people in those areas and then to develop a model that's transferable to other wards. And we're doing that with the University of Birmingham. Local Motion is helping us with that, and we will in fact at our March forum meeting be telling you a lot more about that. One of the things we hope that we'll be doing as a result of it is developing the collaborative network that we started some time ago with some voluntary groups and the statutory authorities to discuss issues going forward and to turn that, if we can, into a local resilience forum, which is bottom up rather than the top down ones, which are the regional ones that exist at the moment. We're also developing a carbon literacy project by working with other organisations, and one of our members is an expert on risk assessment, has done some workshops on the En-ROAD system, which comes out of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and we're trying to develop that a bit further. We've attended many, many events, including the Broomfield Autumn Fair, the Enfield Voluntary Action, done something at the North Mid Hospital, and we addressed the over 50s AGM as well. We've been working closely with Local Motion and hope to do so more in the future because they, like us, are very interested in systemic change at a local level, local governance. So we're looking at how we can extend the ideas around Doughnut Economics with them and how we can take it forward. We've been working with the Enfield Voluntary Action EVA and have who are trying to create energy champions to give advice to groups about how to save energy. And we're involved in that and have a member of our groups on that. And so that I think is I think really important. And local governments and sustainability is really what we're talking about today, and we hope to take that forward much more. We have working groups as well, one on air pollution, and Aurora's on here today, and she's done a lot of work on that. And part of the schools project is that we're supplying some schools with air pollution monitors, and so that they can measure air pollution inside and outside of schools and try to then incorporate that into their curriculum, almost into a citizen science project. And Aurora's written a paper for schools on how they might do that. We have a land use group looking particularly at the local plan, looking at the green belt and how it's been endangered at Enfield and what we can do about it. And we have a waste and sustainability group, which looks at waste generally, how we can recycle better, looks at what the North London Waste Authority is doing, and also is very concerned on food waste as well, and they've been doing some work on that. So overall, we've been quite busy this year, and we hope to develop those much further in the coming year. So briefly, is there any questions on that at all? No? Okay, Tony, do you want to say, oh, Asuni, go ahead. Asuni.
I think he's just got his hand up.
Yeah, oh, well, leave it. You'll come on in a minute. Tony, shall we go to the Treasurer's report? Tony, if you can take your unmute.
Sorry. Yeah, I was chatting away there. I didn't realise I was on mute. Okay, so pretty quick report. Basically, we have a balance of £16,362.88. So we haven't had nothing going out this month. So it's looking quite healthy at the moment.
Okay, that's the latest we're at the moment. Some of that is money that's come in to help us with the vulnerability project, and we'll be getting more money in for that as well later from the University of Birmingham, who are developing it with us. So some of that is sort of, ring-fenced for that particular project. So that's our situation at the moment. We're not hugely, held up in terms of finance organisation, because we tend to work from project to project, and we work a great deal with volunteers, which is great. So anyone want to raise anything on that? Okay, well, the last point then is this. We have a Suni. Yeah, you keep putting your hand up and I'm trying to hear you. Do you want to say something?
Hello, yes. Okay,
ahead,
I'm into waste management in Nigeria. I work in a waste management, agency at the subnational in Nigeria. I'm interested in being a member of the Waste and Sustainability Group.
The which group,
That's
sorry?
my question. That's my comment.
Which group, sorry?
He's interested in joining
Waste and sustainability, the waste
Yes, I would.
Who's that? Sorry.
Me, Zoe. Hello.
Oh, Zoe White.
Yeah.
You'd like to come on, would you? Okay, that's
Absolutely.
great. Could you write that into the chat with your email for us?
Yeah.
If you could do that, that would be fantastic. Is there anyone else? I mean, you don't have to decide now. You can write to us later if you want, but is there anyone else who would be interested? No, okay, well, we've got one, and that's good, because I think if we can get another 2 or 3 during the year with the group we've got now, it will be a really good group. I think, its whole nature has changed, I think, this year, and it's become more participative, and that's really important. So I'd like to thank all the ones who are on the group, at the core group at the moment, and Zoe and Brett, great that you would like to join us there. The next meeting of the core group, Zoe, is on between 7:30 and 9 o'clock on February the 11th. So if you jot that down, I will send you a link to that as well. Okay, is there anyone who wants to say anything? Any other business? Anything anybody wants to add? Bob, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, from a lot of what you're doing, I've put into the chat that there is Cafe Scientifique. I don't know if you've heard of it. And I think there's a couple of groups maybe still in London. But they run, because I run the one in Basingstoke, run talks on science, tech, and climate. And if you can find someone to do that, it's a good way of engaging the public in, what's happening in the world of science and tech. And we've had in Basingstoke quite a lot of talks which are climate related in the past. So might be worthwhile talking to Anne Grand, who's the coordinator for that.
Yeah, no, it would, and we might be able to do something and have a forum, a meeting on that, and maybe sometime in the future we should do something about the importance of science and climate change, because many people are now, deniers and procrastinators are attacking science, and I think it is important to really emphasize the importance of what science is saying at the moment. So yeah, thank you, and I will contact her. Anyone else? No? Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And what we'll do is we're going to be talking to Ben and Paul and Angela and others about how we develop thinking about local governance and the Doughnut Economics model and other models and things that Bob has said to us today as well. And and I'm sure it will, a project with Halley and the University of Birmingham goes ahead well, which I'm sure it will, then looking at how we can look at the most vulnerable people in our communities and how we can help them and what we can do to develop community resilience will be important. So what we've talked about today about, community governance is very much directly related to developing resilience and community resilience. Hallie, you wanted to say something about that? You have to unmute.
There we go. Sorry about that. I just wanted to say, Francis and everyone, that the university has just approved our grant application. So we'll be going through, and there's a collaboration agreement on its way to you, Francis, to sign.
Oh dear. I have to sign my life away, do I?
Okay. It's happening.
Okay. Well, we're going to meet anyhow, aren't we, on Thursday and talk about that. And is that a clap, Clara, or a hand up?
It was a clap. I'm very
That was a
happy
clap.
to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. And thanks, Hallie. And thanks, Paul, because Locomotion has also helped us on this as well. And so that should make it a successful project.
Before we go, can I quickly say something, Francis?
Yeah, of course.
I just wanted to say we had our second repair cafe at the library in Palmer's Green at the weekend, and it went really well. So people bringing stuff in to get repaired. So it's going well. So we'll be continually going around the borough.
Yeah, and that's great, Tony. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The repair cafe started because we put the climate change officer in Enfield in touch with the National Repair Cafe organisation. And as a result of that, the repair cafes have started up. So in a way, I could have put that in the report as well. But I mean, they've done the work on it. We just made the contact.
Okay, I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
But thanks, Tony. I know you're heavily involved in that and you're doing great work on that too. Okay, anyone else? No? Okay, well, I will send the recording of this forum out to everyone. I'll try to do that tomorrow if I can. And then the following week, we'll send the individual presentations out as well, so people have it. And I will send out in the newsletter probably with both of those newsletters, one on the forum today and one on the presentations, a lot of the links that people have put up, because they are really, really useful to help us understand local governance, Doughnut Economics, community resilience, and so on. So thank you all for attending, and it's been a really, really well-attended forum today with, as I say, about 70 people registering to come on. Some obviously don't come on when they register, but they will get, because you'll all go on our mailing list. So everyone who registered will get the information we send out. So thank you, everyone. And I guess we'll end this meeting. Oh, one more thing. Thanks, Ben, for putting it together. Ben, you did a great job in getting the speakers and putting it all together. And that's been fantastic.
Thanks everybody for like such an exciting year, and here's to another one.
I hope so too. Okay,
Cheers.
everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone. Thank you, and we'll
Thank
end
you,
this
everyone.
meeting now.